In this evening's health headlines, the Pentagon has confirmed its first known case of monkeypox in the U.S. military. An active duty service member recently tested positive for the virus. As of this week, monkeypox has been found in 15 states, just weeks after it was first detected in the U.S. And according to the CDC, the total number of cases so far has been less than 50. The CDC has stressed that the virus is not a high risk to the public. Well, Arizona officials have confirmed the first cases of a bird flu in the Southwest that has led to the deaths of 37 million birds on the commercial farms in the central and eastern U.S. Arizona Game and Fish officials announced this week that the disease was present in 3 wild cormorants that had been found dead in a park. The agency says that the disease has not yet been found in any domestic birds or in commercial operations. Well, more than 900 pounds of ready-to-eat salad products made in Minnesota are being recalled due to concerns of listeria. The Northern Tier Bakery in St. Paul is recalling 2 different types of Supermom's Kitchen Chef salad. The products were made between May 18th and June 8th. The items were shipped to retailers in Minnesota and Wisconsin.
In this evening's business headlines, the price of gas, food, and most other goods and services jumped in May, raising inflation to a new 4-decade high while giving American households no relief from rising costs. Consumer prices surged 8.6% from 12 months earlier, higher than April's year-over-year increase of 8.3%. It is the biggest yearly increase since December of 1981 and will heighten the pressure on the Federal Reserve to keep raising interest rates. Smithfield Foods plans to close a processing plant in California. The company, which operates the hog processing plant in Sioux Falls, says it's closing the plant because of the escalating cost of doing business in California. The company says it will service California customers with its Farmer John brand and other brands and products from facilities in the Midwest. Auto dealerships in Minnesota are suing over the state's Clean Cars plan, which will require them to supply more electric vehicles to customers. The rule would take effect in 2024. The Minnesota Auto Dealers Association says the state doesn't qualify for clean air standards adopted by California. The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency says there's a strong demand for electric vehicles, but many of those vehicles get sent to other states which have already adopted the California clean air standards. But the Minnesota Auto Dealers Association says the state doesn't qualify for clean air standards adopted by California.
Well, our skies are pretty clear. Here's a look from Gregory tonight. Stay with us. Adam's back with a look at your 7-day forecast.
First, here's a look at your local stocks.
When my family opened the first...
That's connected to his fundraising, but it's also connected ultimately to his effort to overthrow the election. So we have witnesses, virtually all the witnesses are from Trump world because they were the ones in a position to see what was going on. We have documentary evidence, and we'll just march through the evidence and the witnesses so people can see what the truth is.
The former Fox News political editor, Chris Steyerwalt, who called the 2020 race in Arizona for Biden, will testify Monday morning. What specifically will he be explaining to the American people?
Well, I don't want to preempt his testimony, but he has insight into the loss and the campaign. He's a data analyst and knows that Trump lost and how he lost. That is also reflected in other information within the Trump campaign. They knew that he lost. The administration knew that he lost. But as soon as he was told the specifics about these allegations being incorrect, they'd been investigated, they'd proven to be just bogus, he would continue and continue to repeat them, to basically confuse and lie to his supporters and the American people.
Republican Congressman Scott Perry says what your committee contended last night, that he actually sought a pardon from former President Trump, in his words, is, quote, a shameless and soulless lie. How do you respond to that?
Well, we will provide the evidence we have in its proper order. I would note, it made me remember the minority leader, Mr. McCarthy, claiming that he had never, ever called for the president to resign. And it was only an hour later that the audio tape where he did the very same thing became public. So the evidence doesn't lie. We'll lay out what we have in the proper order.
Jason Miller, a key Trump aide whose taped interview was featured last night, as a lot of us will remember, says he was taken out of context. We're told the full transcripts will be released at some point. Why not release them now?
Well, that's up to the chairman, but I think obviously his interview went on for a very long time. We didn't play the whole thing. I don't think there was anything at all misleading, but we'll release all the transcripts in due course, and people can see that there was nothing to this. You know, they have really no answer to what we've outlined here. I mean, this is a very serious assault on the peaceful transfer of power, really an assault on our democratic republic. And I've heard Republican legislators talking about everything else, trying to discredit the effort, but they can't. And I think Liz Cheney said it best. One day, someday, Donald Trump will be gone, but the dishonor that they have brought on themselves will remain.
Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, we'll look forward to the hearings next week. Thank you very, very much. Coming up, the pain of high prices is only getting worse, especially if you need to fill up your car with gas. Stay with us. You're in the Situation Room.
Bring your eye. Saying it's a dead man's party.
And vehicles while providing a shorter distance to cross Dakota Avenue.
A special outdoor production of Shakespeare's Hamlet will take place this weekend. Reese Duncan spoke with two of the cast members. She has our story.
I'm Reese Duncan here talking with Jackson Clavon and Noah Saylor about their performance of Hamlet happening at Augustana University. The Dakota Academy of Performing Arts is putting on the production. DAPA is a youth program who's doing the play.
I thought it'd be super fun because my mom works at Lincoln because she's an English teacher and she teaches Shakespeare. So my mom was like, hey, you should try this. So then I was like, yeah, I should.
It's a really fun show. There's a lot of different elements to it. Murder, mystery, a lot of humor actually for being a sad show.
They're excited to finally perform their show outside at Augustana University. In Sioux Falls, Reese Duncan, Dakota News Now.
The production of Hamlet is tonight and tomorrow night at 7 on the green by the Ole statue on the Augustana campus.
It's starting to feel a lot more like summer. Kate has a look at the forecast when we come back.
The Dakota News
is making a very good point. But, you know, I think we've become both so polarized as well as so desensitized to, you know, chaos. I think a lot of people were expecting maybe, you know, it's a primetime hearing. Are we going to see, you know, sparks fly and Rudy Giuliani running around pleading the fifth and screaming at people or God knows what, right? And when it wasn't that, I think maybe that's where the critics were saying, well, it didn't deliver. I think that the objective of the January 6th committee in this 2-hour hearing was to reintroduce the issue of January 6th, and in my humble opinion, one of the darkest days, single days in our American history, recent history, and reintroduce it to the American public in a way that was easy to understand all of the events going into that day, and then bookending it with some compelling testimony from law enforcement and that video. And so of the events. And so I think they tried to just make it organized, easy to understand, and resetting the stage because unfortunately we have very short attention spans in the 21st century. And we needed, I think at least the January 6th committee wanted to try to come back and reintroduce this. And then we're going to have, you know, a number of hearings going forward, one more on prime time.
Okay, I think that, you know, something Ashley said there about Bill Barr, that being sort of a primetime big moment, and that Capri just mentioned it also. We have to look at the fact that this was very much not new. I know that because Bill Barr said the same thing on my boss, Ben Shapiro's podcast not very long ago. He said it in his memoir. So that was not new information. And you would think that if you have a limited time to hold the public's attention, you're going to lead with your strongest argument. And I think we can say that this was certainly not new, and Bill Barr was not offering new information. And as far as this tweet from Trump, I think it's really hard to make the connection that Trump, who, while I will not say did not behave well there, we have to go, he's known for doing a lot of sort of wild tweeting. So him saying, hey, come to the Capitol, it's going to be wild, that certainly does not make the connection that he was signaling something, any more than KSFY was signaling something. And you hear sort of these wild arguments, and I think you have to show something a little more connected than Trump tweeted something and hoped that some of these, loose organizations would interpret it in a certain way. I certainly don't think that was what was going on. And we look at the purpose of what this investigation, what this presentation last night was supposed to accomplish. One of the key things we have to look at was who was on it. And what we know for sure, who was not on it was Jim Jordan and Jim Banks. And we know that House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy was not given an opportunity. And this was
I think we're having some technical issues there.
He was historically not given an opportunity to put who he wanted onto that committee. And that tells you what its real purpose was. And that is to be a political show.
Well, Jason, before you respond, I want to hear that sound. Megan has referred to it now. Ashley referred to it. Kelly in her report as well. So let's listen to what Bill Barr had to say last night. And then let's also listen to some of what Liz Cheney had to say in her introduction. Let's see if we have that pulled up.
I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bullshit. And, I didn't want to be a part of it, and that's one of the reasons that went into me deciding to leave when I did.
I say this to my Republican colleagues who are defending the indefensible. There will come a day when Donald Trump is gone, but your dishonor will remain.
All right, Jason, what do you say?
Yeah, I'm not sure Liz Cheney has the moral high ground from the Cheney family on anything right now. But I mean, what we saw last night was a rehash of what everyone already knew. There was nothing actually new presented. And for something that was supposedly going to be produced in a way that's supposed to connect with the American people by a veteran newsman, I didn't really get that. The most compelling part of what we saw yesterday was the video that we've already seen, but just from a slightly different angle of the assault on the Capitol. And obviously everyone already knows that that was a horrendous act. It was a stain on our history, but that did not at all last night connect the president directly to this. There was no smoking gun, not as it relates to the main point of having this hearing was that Trump actually ordered this and was part of some sort of conspiracy. That tweet that they referenced had nothing happened that day.
Thank you. The evidence is coming. Like they laid it out. They opened the case. This is the way every trial works, right? You have an opening and then you present the evidence.
Except this is not a trial. Yes, except this is not a trial because there's absolutely no opposition. All we're doing, but it's not operating like one because a trial would have an opposition and there's no opposition here. What we saw here was some selectively edited videos. But again, beyond that, you have your first night. Everyone agrees on this panel that this was supposed to be that sort of the blockbuster event. This is supposed to be the way to capture the American people and prove to them that you have a case here. They did not do that. Had they had that smoking gun, we would have seen that yesterday. But pretty much everything that we're going to see over the coming weeks will have already been reported on because they leaked all of that stuff already.
But you know how it works with reasonable doubt,
Why would you not present that?
You never get, and I'll just take you into the criminal sphere here, you never get a murderer saying, I'm going to murder someone on tape. It's super rare. What you have is an evidentiary trial that allows people to sort of put all of it together, and sometimes they have to make reasonable chasm leaps. And so I sense that that's what they're doing in this hearing, is they're putting together all the evidence, laying it out in a nice linear fashion. Hey, you don't think the Americans are a jury? The Americans are a jury, and this could end up being
not in this case because he's not the president.
Right, and where's the defense then in this?
But he could be, unless there's a felony conviction. If there's a referral to the DOJ and there's a felony conviction, he can't be the president again. I think that's where a lot of this is going.
But I think you also have to ask if this
but
was
that's really what this is about. This is about preventing the president
real
from running for
investigation. Wouldn't
re-election
we look
and
at
trying to
questions like
further.
why Nancy Pelosi?
Go ahead, Megan.
So wouldn't you ask why Nancy Pelosi was, why are we not looking into questions of why she ignored early calls and early warnings that there
Tonight, the recession fears growing with the price of nearly everything going up as inflation hits a new 40-year high. The markets tank as the sticker shock of groceries, gas, rent sets in and the economy reacts. Plus, the vacation inflation. How much more will your summer trip cost as airfare, hotel, and car rental prices skyrocket? Scolding Ivanka, the former president's reaction tonight to his daughter's testimony in front of the January 6th Congressional Committee. Plus, what to expect from the second public hearing Monday on the Capitol assault investigation. The new outrage in the Uvalde school shooting. Tonight, why the school police chief waited more than an hour to confront the gunman and why he says he intentionally left his radios behind. Nearly 70 million Americans facing dangerous heat. The triple-digit temperatures setting records from California to Texas. News about the battle for Ukraine. Russian forces are close to capturing another major city in the country's industrial heartland. A heroic rescue. Tonight, after pulling a man off the electrified third rail, the much-deserved reward. And on the road has the play-by-play of an 11-year-old girl's trip to the ballpark and the broadcast booth.
This is the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell, reporting from the nation's capital.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us on this Friday night. Tonight, many Americans didn't need a report to tell them what they're already feeling. Prices are skyrocketing on everything from food to fuel and from rent to airfare. But the numbers are worse than expected. Inflation is surging at the fastest pace in more than 40 years, with the Consumer Price Index rising 8.6% compared to a year earlier. It's actually the fastest pace of inflation since December of 1981. Rampant inflation is not only imposing severe pressures on our pocketbooks, but also on President Biden. Recent surveys show that Americans see high inflation as the nation's top problem as the president's approval ratings on the economy remain underwater. Stocks fell sharply on the news, with the Dow and S&P 500 falling more than 2%. The tech-heavy NASDAQ fell more than 3%. We've got a lot of news to get to tonight, and our White House correspondent Ed O'Keefe is in Los Angeles because that's where the president is talking about this very topic. Good evening, Ed.
Good evening, Nora. CBS News has learned the White House didn't anticipate the inflation numbers would be this big, and the figures are rattling Democrats ahead of the midterm elections, as voters are holding President Biden responsible for something he alone can't fix.
Today's record inflationary report means more economic pain ahead for Americans, and Wall Street felt it too as the markets tumbled. Costs are up on food, rent, and used cars, and of course, gas, which is up almost 50% from a year ago.
Never thought I'd see it go up that much that fast.
It's skyrocketing no matter where you go.
American households are now paying $460 more every month to buy the same things they did last year.
I understand Americans are anxious, and they're anxious for good reason.
President Biden today visited the Port of Los Angeles, where the backlog of idling ships and cargo containers has eased, but had little effect on record prices. Mr. Biden said the war in Ukraine is partly to blame.
I'm doing everything in my power to blunt Putin's price hike and bring down the cost of gas and food.
It's cold comfort for customers and businesses alike.
We are seeing increases of like up to 500%.
Rosa Peralta and Hector Serrano, who run Doña Estella's food truck, cut staff in half and are passing the soaring cost of ingredients onto their clientele.
Paying at least $30 more per box of avocados.
Yes. Inflation's now a full-blown political crisis for the White House and Democrats heading into the midterm elections. 8 in 10 Americans say the economy's in bad shape, and consumer confidence today hit a new low. It's now up to the Federal Reserve, which is likely to boost interest rates in hopes of pushing down prices. Hector and Rosa say it can't happen fast enough.
We're still in business, but we're struggling.
Here in LA today, the president also called on the oil industry to boost domestic production and warned against price gouging. He also wants Congress to pass legislation that would ease shipping costs so they don't get passed along on to customers. But at this point, that's about all he can do. Nora?
And O'Keefe, thank you. One sector of the economy being hit especially hard is the travel industry, with airfares, hotels, and car rentals seeing some of the biggest increases. But there is one bit of good news for international air travelers after the Biden administration announced today that it's dropping its COVID-19 test requirement to enter the U.S. Here's CBS's Chris Van Cleve.
The nation's airlines have been lobbying the Biden administration.
Caroline Edwards, the first Capitol police officer injured in the attack.
I was slipping in people's blood. You know, I was catching people as they fell. It was carnage. It was chaos.
The top Republican on the committee, Liz Cheney, says they will establish Trump's direct responsibility for that carnage. In one piece of never-before-seen video of the attack, a rioter is shown reading Trump's tweet criticizing his vice president even as the Capitol was breached, and how it turned the crowd against Mike Pence.
Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. U.S. demands the truth. Bring out
Pence. Cheney revealing what she said they've learned about what Trump really thought about those Hang Mike Pence chants.
You will hear testimony that, quote, the president did not really want to put anything out calling off the riot or asking his supporters to leave. You will hear that President Trump was yelling and, quote, really angry at advisors who told him he needed to be doing something more. And aware of the rioters' chants to hang Mike Pence, the president responded with this sentiment, quote, maybe our supporters have the right idea. Mike Pence, quote, deserves it.
After the hearing, Trump denied he said that. But listen to what he told me last year in an interview for my book just 2 months after he left the White House.
Were you worried about him during that siege? Were you worried about his safety?
No, I thought he was well protected, and I had heard that he was in good shape. Mm-hmm. No, because I had heard he was in very good shape. But no.
You heard those chants. That was terrible. I mean, it was,
He could have. Well, the people were very angry.
We're saying hang Mike
Because
Pence.
it's common sense, John. It's common sense.
Jonathan Karl with us now has been covering this story since the start. And John, the hearing last night, it was really just the beginning. They're planning up to 6 more hearings in the coming weeks.
Each one of those hearings with a different theme, presenting what the committee says will be new information tying Donald Trump to January 6th and the events leading up to the attack on the Capitol. The big question is whether it will break through, and most importantly, whether it will reach people who have come to believe Donald Trump's lies about the election and also about January 6th itself. Whit?
All right, John, thank you. And ABC News will carry the committee's second public hearing live. Attack on the Capitol, the investigation on Monday, 10 a.m. Eastern. Now to the other major headline this Friday night, that new inflation number rising again, the worst in 4 decades. The Consumer Price Index up 8% in May.
Carnage. It was chaos.
Documentarian Nick Quested also testified he was embedded with the Proud Boys, describing a group of 200 to 300 members of the extremist group marching towards the Capitol to scope it out well before the former president's speech.
I was surprised at the size of the group, the anger and the profanity.
And when these chants rang out, a stunning revelation from Vice Chair Liz Cheney.
The president responded with this sentiment, quote, maybe our supporters have the right idea.
She noted it was Vice President Mike Pence who called for the National Guard, not the president, and she offered this rebuke to her GOP colleagues.
There will come a day when Donald Trump is gone, but your dishonor will remain.
President Biden disagreed.
That the same forces that led January 6th remain at work today.
The committee will hold 3 hearings next week focused on the former president's big lie, as well as his alleged efforts to pressure the Justice Department and his own vice president to overturn the election. CBS News has learned that Trump's former acting attorney general, Jeffrey Rosen, is also expected to testify. Nora.
That'll be interesting. Nicole Killian, thank you so much. Well, today we learned this, that 33 children at the Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, waited for more than an hour before police moved in. And the police, they reportedly knew that some kids were still alive inside. CBS's Omar Villafranca tells us the school police chief's excuse for why his officers waited to confront the gunman.
Uvalde School Police Chief Pete Arredondo is telling his side of the story. In an interview with the Texas Tribune, Arredondo revealed he decided to enter the school without his police radios because he believed they would slow him down. Arredondo told the outlet one had a whip-like antenna that would hit him as he ran. The other had a clip that Arredondo knew would cause it to fall off his tactical belt during a long run. While he and officers waited outside the barricaded classroom for more than an hour, students were making 911 calls from inside, begging the police to come in and help them. But Arredondo told the Tribune he was not aware of the 911 calls because he did not have his radio, and no one in the hallway relayed that information to him. And in a surprising revelation, Arredondo said he didn't believe he was in charge of the scene. I didn't issue any orders, Arredondo said. I called for assistance and asked for an extraction tool to open the door. We asked former Dallas Schools Police Chief Craig Miller about Arredondo's decision not to bring his police radios inside.
Any reasonable police officer would know to take their police radio with them, and certainly to not have communications when you're going into the fray is problematic.
And as for Arredondo's claim of not knowing he was the on-scene commander?
Because Chief Arredondo has 4 stars on his collar, many of the officers who were there may have felt in their mind that he was in charge.
As the questions around the response continue, so do the funerals for the victims. Today, Eva Midela, one of the teachers killed in the attack, was laid to rest. She was remembered for her bright smile. We learned that Eva Mireles and at least 2 students were taken by ambulance from the school and pronounced dead at the hospital. That means one of the biggest questions for investigators is whether students and teachers' lives could have been saved had police gone into that room any sooner. Nora?
So difficult to think about that. Omar Villafranca, thank you. Texas will remain under a dangerous heat wave through the weekend as triple-digit temperatures extend across much of the Southwest, all the way to California. For the forecast, let's bring in meteorologist Mike Bettis from our partners at the Weather Channel. Hey there, Mike.
And good evening, Nora. The extreme heat will show no signs of letting up this weekend. Record-setting temperatures are likely for us from places like Las Vegas back down into central Texas. Heat once again comes in on Sunday. Place like Austin, a record-setting 102 degrees. We'll do 101 degrees in Shreveport. On Monday, that heat expands.
But you see the last year and a half, and where that mountain is climbing, that's us. Let's bring in our panel. Molly Hemingway, editor-in-chief at The Federalist, Juan Williams, Fox News analyst, and Washington Post columnist Mark Thiessen. What about the communicating around this, Mark, for the administration?
It's been a disaster. The president goes out and says the economy is doing great. We have great growth and all the rest of it. They say, Janet Yellen says we have the strongest labor market in history. We actually have the worst labor shortage in American history. The reason we have inflation right now is because the demand is so high and businesses can't find workers. So one of the things I learned as a presidential speechwriter is that when you go out and say things that are contrary to the lived reality of everyday Americans, they shut you out. And that's what this administration continues to do. And the American people are shutting them out, as the polls show.
And some of the messaging, Juan, is essentially, you know what, we don't really deal with inflation. Here's Brian Deese, economic advisor to the president.
The Fed has the space it needs to do everything that it needs to take on inflation. That is the most important thing that we can do, that a president can do, and we can't take that for granted. Our past president was aggressively tweeting at the Federal Reserve Chair, but prior presidents were more quietly politicizing the process. You're not going to see that out of this White House, and that.
You know, it just doesn't fit on a bumper sticker. You know, let the Fed deal with inflation.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think what Mark said is right about people's lived experience being contrary. So what you're really talking about is how much power do presidents have to affect economic outcomes. I think that's open to debate. It's not clear they have much. But I will say that if you look at the policy options, and I think that's what people are looking at, and that's where the real disconnect comes, because you know, people really aren't into the policy. They're just into the fact that they're paying more for gas or more for eggs. But when you look at the policy options, you know, the president was out in Los Angeles today speaking at a port. Well, guess what? He has had some impact in stopping the kind of backup at the port, helping with the supply chain issue. If you're thinking about, well, what else has he done? You know, you think about the Fed, and has the Fed taken any action? Yes, they have taken action, and they're likely to take more, as you heard earlier in the show tonight. So, you know, those things are real, but it's just bad news for the Democrats. It's bad news for President Biden. And it looks like, you know, in terms of the war issue, he often points at Russia as a reason. It is a reason with regard to the gas prices and the food prices, but he's not going to change because he thinks he's got to keep his foot on Putin's neck. He's not going to lose that war, even if it means that we're going to pay a little more in inflationary prices at home.
Yeah, Molly, last word on this.
Well, we do know that inflation is a result of some of these Biden administration policies that have not been opposed by any Democrats. Republicans were also profligate in their spending, but Democrats passed two massive bills that flooded the system with money. Inflation is always a monetary phenomenon, as Milton Friedman would say. And so this is the direct result of those policies, and everything from the Biden White House has been tone deaf. Biden said that he would let the Fed figure things out. He would begin to think about the supply chain issues, and he would raise taxes. These are not the things people want to hear. They would really like people to focus on what's happening and what's affecting their pocketbook every day.
Meanwhile, hours after the first primetime hearing for the January 6th committee, let's take a listen.
For anyone who didn't understand how violent that event was, I saw it, I documented it, and I experienced it.
I don't think this is going to change the mind of my colleagues, unfortunately.
The Democrats are ignoring, really, what is affecting the American people. The highest inflation in more than 40 years. Record high gas prices. Doubled since President Biden has taken office.
Mark, about 20 million people, according to the ratings, watched on all the different networks. Your thoughts on the day after and the fallout?
So I take a backseat to no one in saying that what happened on January 6th was a disgrace, and that President Trump's conduct on January 6th was a disgrace. It shouldn't be pushed under the rug. It should, and there should be a bipartisan, impartial inquiry into it. But when you have a primetime hearing into this, the message you are sending to the American people is that this is the most important issue facing our country today. This is more important than 40-year high inflation. It's more important than record gas prices, more important than the worst border crisis in American history, more important than the worst crime wave in American history. And those people who, as you point out, are out there paying $460 a month more for the same stuff every month, that people under $50,000 who say in a new Washington Post poll that it's had a major impact on their finances, they're looking at this and saying, I think it's important. I was disgusted by what happened on January 6th, but this is not the most important issue on June 10th, 2022.
Molly?
Well, political violence is always bad, and it's bad whether it affects the hundreds of people that were in the Capitol on January 6th. Americans know it was bad during the summer of 2020 when the White House was besieged, federal courthouses, cities across the land. This Democrat Congress and their uniparty hearing is not addressing political violence for real. They're not answering the real questions people have about why the Capitol was left unguarded or what the role of the FBI was. We know there was a limited role of the FBI in terms of people who were there that day. This is not a real hearing, and there is no Republican-appointed representation, which makes it completely illegitimate. And the politicization of January 6th, I think, is repulsive to a lot of Americans who condemn all political violence, whether it comes as it does predominantly from the left or whether it came from the right that day.
Juan?
Well, I think I differ in that, to me, it's very important to preserve American democracy and our Constitution. And I think what we saw last night was, the Congress, the panel, saying, you know what, on that day, January 6, 2021, American democracy was hanging by a thread. And it's still hanging by a thread to the extent that you have people who still believe that, in fact, President Biden stole the election from President Trump, and you have people running for office in the upcoming midterms and potentially 2024 who think there was widespread fraud. That continues. And so for this panel to make the case that, in fact, on that day, and they presented this case last night to the jury, to us, the American people, that, guess what, the president was attempting a coup. They showed video of violence. The police officer there said she was knocked unconscious, slipping on blood. You heard from the president's inner circle, his daughter, his attorney general, his vice president. That's a strong case.
There were new things, and we've talked about that, new nuggets that have come out, and we're going to follow all of it. But to your point, if they're making the case to the jury, the American people, there is no defense side in this particular committee, to Molly's point. We're going to continue to cover all the elements of it. Up next, the Friday Lightning Round. We'll see what we get.
Conclusion, and that is until someone just shuts you down completely. Well, that's what this committee is in the process of doing. They don't want to be a part of that, which gets me to my fallback Friday moment. For all you Republicans out there who think Donald Trump actually gives a crap about you or anything related to you, just ask Mike Pence how that feels, baby. To know that the President of the United States stood there and says that you deserve to die because you wouldn't do what I instructed you to do. Now, I don't know how y'all gonna, deal with that. There are a whole lot of psychiatry and psychologists and people you can lay on the couch with about that. But you need to get your stuff together. And Tommy, let me just say, boy, it's just a pleasure to be on with you, man.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's nice to see both of you, man. I'm glad I'm the comedian on here because there's a lot that's funny these days. You know what I mean? I get this one.
Funny ha-ha or funny terrible?
Yeah, what I have to say about all that is, the denial is a river in Egypt. We all know that one, you know what I mean? And the proof always comes the proof always comes out, and we'll just have to see. You know what I mean? It's just been a great career for me. I'm a big fan, all right, of you guys over there and Rachel. And ironically, I was on a cruise ship doing a television show the whole 4 years Trump was in office and when he got voted in. So the only way that I got news was from you guys. So I watched the whole arc.
Well, as the Lonely Island guys used to say, I'm on a boat.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. But, it's helped my perspective as well, man.
Well, let me jump in on this because you're very kind to say that. And shout out to Rachel. We are all fans of Rachel here. But we're not going to let you talk about us. Michael and I do want to shout out In Living Color. I grew up on it. Yes. Pioneering. Social commentary, goofiness.
Yes.
And if you know Michael Steele, there's a lot of times where he just looks at what's going on in politics and says, homie, don't play that. Let's take a look at some highlights.
Welcome to the Homeboy Shopping Network.
Former presidential candidate, Mr. Ross Perot.
Apparently, some folks got upset when I referred to African Americans as you people.
From Boogie Down Bronx, Jennifer Lopez.
Mr. Williams, is this your attorney?
No, he just hanging.
Homie.
Homie, don't play that.
I got a two-parter for you. What did that mean to you all then, doing this work together as a team that has pioneered a space that then was less supported in terms of platforms, and now you have so much more, obviously? And two, what's on your mind? Because I know you're working on issues and gun violence and other things, so take it away.
We're just proud because we knew what the show meant to America. We were the hottest comics at the time. Keenan Ivory Wayans was like Professor Xavier from X-Men. He just grabbed us, put us on TV, And we brought color to TV, not color to TV, but we proved to America that all Americans laughed at the same things. Now, when we were in the black and white era, everybody laughed at Andy Griffith. Everybody laughed at I Love Lucy. We all laughed at the same things. But we were able to prove that we all really do coming into the 90s because we showed faces that weren't shown on TV doing the same type of things that we all laugh at. You know, we were outgrowth of Laugh-In, outgrowth of the 70s because we were kids of that. So we were just very proud. And then we brought in this new prop culture that now is prevalent. Now it's corporate. Now, it being cool and being a part of each other's lives was in style at one time. And Living Color had a big part of that.
Respect to that. And now I like 20 seconds, but tell me what you're doing about gun violence.
I'm down here right now in San Antonio doing a show at a comedy club, and I'm raising some money for the Uvalde victims' families. So a proceed of that will go to that because I think our children are really, not only think, I know how important our children are because, how about this? They're our children. So I'm going to be first. You know, there's a lot of news out there, especially being a stand-up comic and, all the stuff that's happening to us. Well, that gives us a good platform to say simple things like, we don't want our children killed by guns because lawmakers want to sit down and not make it happen.
Yeah. It all makes sense. And as we try to do it around here, we cover more than one thing. I'm thrilled to meet you because, like I said, grew up on it. Michael clearly watches, and I feel like other people out there do too. So, Tommy Davidson, thank you. And I'm glad you enjoyed your time on the cruise ship.
And thank you guys too. And stay out there on the battlefield. We need you, man.
There it is. Tommy and Michael, appreciate it. We'll be back tonight with one more thing.
You're pretty particular about keeping a healthy body. What goes on it?
Get started.
Well, the weather tonight's going to be pretty nice. Maybe you want to kick back by a fire and just relax tonight. The forecast for that's looking pretty good. Temperatures are right around 9 o'clock tonight, going to be in the low to mid 70s and not much wind either. So definitely a great night for any outdoor activities. And really the next several nights, aside from some chances of storms over the weekend and then Tuesday night into Wednesday, I mean, those temperatures, Sam, pretty nice for, bonfire looking weather perhaps.
I'm not going to argue with you on that. I would agree. Thank you, Austin. Appreciate your time here at 5:30. NBC Nightly News is up next. We're back in 2 minutes over on KSFY. Have a good night.
This is where their Keytruda story begins. Keytruda.
San Francisco, who was defeated this week by a liberal San Francisco electorate who said they're fed up with the crime, and I think it's a message to Democrats across the country.
Yeah. Molly, winner and loser.
My winner, the Colorado Avalanche, who are headed to the Stanley Cup. My loser would be the corrupt and fraudulent January 6th committee, which conducted a Soviet-style show trial, and which people are asking, are they going to have any effect on people's opinion? I think they will have an effect on people's opinion, that they will make it so that Democrats lose by even more, and that people see that criminalizing opposition to how the election was administered in 2020 is un-American.
Best is that we got to use the graphic twice. Mark, winner and then loser.
My winner is Brett Kavanaugh. No person in this country has gone through more. He suffered a malign attacks on his character and now an assassination attempt in order to serve his country. We are blessed to have someone like him on the federal bench. And my loser is Jimmy Kimmel, who had the first interview with Joe Biden in months and months and months and just thrust him softballs. You'd think out of self-respect, he would have asked one tough question, but apparently this is why Greg Gutfeld is number one.
There you go, a little plug. Panel, thanks. Make it a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you believe?
Dakota News Now. Political news when you want it.
Dakota News Now brings you reliability in an unpredictable world. Alexandra and Eric start your morning with the latest stories, and First Alert meteorologist Aaron Doudna will help you plan and prepare for your busy day. Dakota News Now, every weekday from 5 to 7.
When news breaks, you need it now.
Stream Dakota News Now on your favorite platform and stay connected to what's happening now, right here in South Dakota. Dakota News Now. News when you want it.
Join us at 5:25 for the Dakota News Now Media Camp newscast.
We'll have news highlights from this week. And I'll show you your local forecast.
Weather changes constantly. Be prepared by using the First Alert Weather app. From viewing conditions with our Doppler radar to just a simple temp check, you can be sure to stay informed with the First Alert Weather app. It's weather when you want it.
News when you want it isn't just a saying. It's a promise we've made at Dakota News Now.
Now we're expanding on that commitment and giving you another option for news on the weekend.
Join us Saturday and Sunday morning starting at 9. It's a later look at headlines and events happening near you.
And I'll have a look at your First Alert forecast to show you if your weekend plans are a go or not.
So go ahead, hit that snooze button one more time, grab a cup of coffee, and start your weekends with us.
Join Cordell Wright and meteorologist Austin Haskins weekend mornings at 9 on Dakota News Now.
Investigate TV tackles the top topics. When your health is compromised, we investigate. Corporate greed exposed. The powerful held accountable with in-depth journalism led by award-winning journalist Lee Zurich. Download Investigate TV for your Roku and Amazon Fire devices.
Tonight, the soaring cost of nearly everything you buy as inflation hits a new 40-year high. Consumer prices rising in May at the fastest level since 1981. The surging cost of food, housing, airfare, the national average for gas, a penny away from $5 a gallon. The stock market plunging and President Biden under pressure, what he blames the surge on. Also tonight, the fallout as the January 6th committee begins laying out its case against Donald Trump. The committee alleging Trump was at the center of a sophisticated 7-part plan to overturn the 2020 election and incite the violent attack on the Capitol. The stunning testimony from his inner circle, including daughter Ivanka Trump. Tonight, how the former president is responding and what to watch for in the hearings ahead. The Uvalde school police chief breaking his public silence, how he's defending the response to the massacre after it took police 77 minutes to breach the classroom. The Biden administration announcing it's dropping one of the longest-running COVID restrictions on travel. The dangerous heat wave, 51 million under advisories. Can the power grid handle it? And the truth is out there, why NASA is now joining the hunt for UFOs.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening, everyone, from Los Angeles, where President Biden today offered an explanation for why consumer prices are still climbing. May's numbers out today, dashing hopes inflation was starting to cool. Instead, it jumped another percent, growing to 8.6% year over year, leaving inflation sitting at 40-year highs, affecting everything from home prices to food, clothing to gasoline. Put another way, American households are paying $460 more per month to buy the same amount of goods and services. With the Port of Los Angeles as his background, President Biden putting some of the blame on shippers, oil companies, and Vladimir Putin as Wall Street suffered a major sell-off. The Dow lost 880 points, 2.7%. The NASDAQ down 414 points, 3.5%. Tonight, all eyes now turn to the Fed and its next steps. Tom Costello has more.
The red arrows on Wall Street represent real money for American families. Mutual funds, 401ks, college savings, and pensions all sliding. As today's report shows inflation even worse than last month, now running at 8.6%, the fastest pace since 1981. And there is nowhere to hide. Food up 10.1%, led by soaring egg prices as bird flu ravages chicken flocks. Housing up 5.5%, and gasoline surging every day. $4.99, today's national average, but $6.42 a gallon in California.
I'm stopping at 40. I'm not going over 40. I don't care where it gets me.
Also driving inflation higher, airfares. Domestic airfares averaging $403 round trip. From here in Atlanta out to L.A., up 65% from 2019. From New York to Denver, up 58% from 2019. From Chicago down to Orlando, up 47%. At American Coney Island in Detroit,
here you go, you're all set.
Third-generation owner Grace Karros says her costs have soared this year.
26% on buns, 12% on a paper bag, 25% on a hot dog, almost 30% on ground beef and chicken.
In Los Angeles today, President Biden blamed the higher prices worldwide on shippers who are price gouging and Russia's war in Ukraine.
But we've never seen anything like Putin's tax on both food and gas.
Many economists also blame pandemic-related stimulus money and the Fed for not acting sooner. Now the pressure is building on Chairman Jerome Powell to raise interest rates even faster to bring inflation under control. Some experts calling for a full 1% hike next week.
He's got to get control of that narrative and say, listen, we're not going to dribble out the medicine. Let's take it now.
But while pay raises have been wiped out by inflation, unemployment remains near 50-year lows for now.
You know what? We're still here, we're still serving customers, and the sun is shining.
Tom, I'm trying to imagine what some of the dinner table conversations are right now. What is consumer sentiment telling us?
Well, the numbers right now are pretty bad. Consumer sentiment now at the worst levels on record dating back to the 1970s. And the reason is simple. Inflation eats into every family budget, and at the moment, virtually everything Americans are buying costs more. And there's a very real risk that the country is now headed for a recession, Lester.
All right, Tom Costello, thank you. Tonight's other top story, new reaction tonight from former President Trump and President Biden after last night's primetime hearing by the January 6th committee, which accused Mr. Trump of leading an attempted coup. Garrett Haake is at the Capitol.
In a made-for-television primetime production, the January 6th committee laid out their case that the deadly attack on the U.S. Capitol was no spontaneous riot, but the culmination of a months-long attempted coup with one man to blame.
Donald Trump was at the center of this conspiracy, and ultimately, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, spurred a mob of domestic enemies of the Constitution to march down the Capitol and subvert American democracy.
And tonight, former President Trump responding after the committee played new video from depositions by his attorney general and other advisors, saying they told him he had lost.
I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bull. You can't live in a world where the incumbent administration stays in power based on its view, unsupported by specific evidence, that there was fraud in the election.
Barr's argument swaying Ivanka Trump.
It affected my perspective. I respect Attorney General Barr, so I accepted what he was saying.
But not the former president, who on social media today attacked his former attorney general as a coward and said his daughter had, quote, long since checked out on following the election results. President Biden speaking out this afternoon.
The same forces that led January 6th remain at work today.
The committee also presenting violent new video of the attack, never before seen, moving lawmakers and Capitol police officers present to tears. Officer Carolyn Edwards, who suffered a traumatic brain injury fighting on the Capitol's West Front, describing in vivid detail the sheer scope of the day's violence.
What I saw was just a war scene. There were officers on the ground, you know, they were bleeding, they were throwing up, they were, you know, they had, I mean, I saw friends with blood all over their faces. I was slipping in people's blood.
Officer Harry Dunn trained Edwards.
She did a fantastic job, and I couldn't be proud. I was just so proud of her bravery. I called her a shero.
The committee made up of 7 Democrats, but just 2 Republicans, all appointed by Speaker Pelosi. Both Republicans fierce critics of former President Trump and of those who still support him.
I say this to my Republican colleagues who are defending the indefensible. There will come a day when Donald Trump is gone, but your dishonor will remain.
House Republicans brushing off the hearing as a Democratic distraction.
Well, last night's hearing was a primetime dud. Nothing came out of it that we didn't know before, and it didn't change anybody's minds. At the end of the day, this committee is trying to prosecute Donald Trump for crimes that he did not commit.
Garrett, watching last night, it felt like a preview to much, much more. I know they've lined up 3 more hearings for next week, correct?
Yeah, Lester, that's right. These hearings won't be in prime time, but they will cover the pressure campaigns against Mike Pence and the Department of Justice. And on Monday, they'll focus specifically on the former president's lies about the election results. Lester?
All right, Garrett, thanks. And for more, let's bring in Kristen Welker now at the White House. Kristen, nearly 20 million people were watching last night, and we're already getting an idea of how this is playing out.
That's right, Lester. Democrats tell us tonight the hearing was a powerful start to laying out the case against former President Trump, and they're signaling they won't shy away from trying to link Trump-backed candidates in key swing states to the horror that unfolded that day. But the reality check here, Democrats also know these new devastating inflation numbers, plus record-high gas prices, the baby formula shortage, are what Americans care about most. So they're walking a fine line as well. Meanwhile, Republicans today are blasting the hearing as a partisan distraction from issues like inflation, with Democrats facing the potential for big losses. Bottom line here, with the country so sharply divided, it's hard to see the hearings will have a major impact on the overall outcome in November. Lester.
All right, Kristen Welker at the White House, thank you. Tonight, Uvalde school police chief breaking his public silence. In an interview with the Texas Tribune, he spoke about the response to the massacre, why he didn't have a radio, and what he understood the chain of command to be. Here's Morgan Chesky.
Good evening.
Tonight, Pete Arredondo defending his response. The Uvalde school police chief and his attorney telling the Texas Tribune he was committed to stop the shooter or die trying. Running into Robb Elementary armed with his Glock service pistol and no body armor. But the 29-year police veteran left not one but two police radios outside the school, telling reporter James Barragan he thought they would slow him down.
He said that was a conscious decision. He rushed in there, put both of his hands on his gun because he was taught that that was the most accurate way to attack the shooter.
We've now learned the gunman walked in through an unlocked door. Arredondo and another officer entering here minutes later. He says they ran towards gunfire in rooms 111 and 112, where both doors were locked. The school's chief says after bullets pierced a door and a wall, grazing at least one officer, he called for tactical gear, a sniper, and keys to get inside the classroom. The first ring of 6 keys didn't work. Arredondo says he was later given another with 20 to 30 keys. Precious time ticked by. The chief saying, each time I tried a key, I was just praying. 77 minutes after the massacre began, the classroom door was finally unlocked.
Somebody jump out the window.
During that time, Arredondo says he was also telling officers to evacuate people through windows to avoid having students coming into the hallway. And he's refuting the claim from DPS that he was the one in charge.
The chief of police of the Consolidated Independent School District is the incident commander.
Arredondo said he had taken on the role of frontline responder inside the school, assuming some other officer or official had taken control of the larger response.
And in that same interview, the chief went on to say that he never gave any order to any other agency here at the scene, saying because he was unaware that he had ever been made the incident commander. Lester?
Okay, Morgan, thank you. On Sunday, this country will end the COVID testing requirement for air travelers arriving from overseas. It was one of the longest travel restrictions of the pandemic. Airlines and others in the travel industry pushed the Biden administration to drop it, saying it hurt demand for overseas trips. Here in the West, tens of millions are suffering through a dangerously early heat wave gripping the region from Texas to here in California. The triple-digit temperatures causing concern over whether power grids can meet demand. Here's Miguel Almaguer.
Tonight, the brutal broil across much of the West. A heat wave so oppressive, forecasters say it could be dangerous or even deadly for some of the 51 million Americans now trapped under a heat dome.
I try not to go out because of the heat as well.
With states from Texas to California sweltering in the sun, upwards of 50 daily high temperature records could be shattered through the weekend.
Every year we think it's very hot, but right now I think this weekend's supposed to be really hot.
Cities like Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston not only cooking in the heat, but melting in high humidity. The first heat wave of the year also gripping cities like Las Vegas and Phoenix, where many will swelter through daytime highs around 110 degrees and overnight lows in the 80s.
In Arizona, it's really hot.
Earlier than normal and prolonged heat waves will be an early test for our aging infrastructure. As average temperatures get hotter, it seems power grids fail more often.
Unless we really fundamentally rethink the way that we plan and design and operate our systems, it's going to be more rolling blackouts, longer lasting outages, and everybody's going to sort of feel more pain.
Tonight, cause for concern and an early test for the power grid, especially as cities like Death Valley live up to their name. Miguel Almaguer, NBC News.
In 60 seconds, the hunt for UFOs. Now NASA is joining the search for answers about those mysterious sightings that have intrigued us for decades.
Tonight, though, we're talking about lows in the
election. Why would you go to that rump group of Giuliani, Powell, and others who really are just along for the ride and start following them rather than the people you've been working with all along? And so even when you started going to court, you went to court over 60 times and you lost. And so at some point in America, when you lose an election, and I tried to show that in the time of the Civil War, President Lincoln was faced with a similar situation, and he rallied the country rather than divide the country and said, if I lose, we will cooperate with the winner. Donald Trump is the only president in the history of the United States not to cooperate in the peaceful transition of power.
Chairman Thompson, I very much appreciate your time. Thank you. I know we will all be watching again for the second hearing, which is, of course, on Monday morning. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
And next, the Dow plunging nearly 900 points. Inflation in the United States hits a 40-year high. And, you know, in many crucial categories, it's just never been this high. Tonight, President Biden is pointing fingers.
Putin's price hike is hitting America hard.
How much, though, is Putin responsible for the price surge Americans are experiencing? Plus, outrage growing as Pete Arredondo, the Uvalde school's police chief, who authorities said was in command, now claims, well, he never considered himself in charge. The reporter who interviewed Arredondo is out front. And Putin's alarming new claim shows his endgame does go well beyond Ukraine.
First, and starting from there is huge.
NASA says they hope to eventually cross-reference credible sightings with solid data like satellite images or atmospheric records. But as for what they are...
So far, we've seen NASA say that there's no evidence that this is extraterrestrial life. But does that mean that it's not extraterrestrial life?
I'm a scientist, and if somebody asks me, is this extraterrestrial life? Frankly, at this moment in time, the simple answer is the right one, which is I don't know.
A promise to keep an open mind and boldly study what no space agency has thoroughly investigated before. Gotti Schwartz, NBC News, Los Angeles.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Up next, 6 months after a tornado leveled a Kentucky town, how has Mayfield come back?
The can-do of entire...
serve as ranking member of the January 6th Select Committee. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi opposed and blocked his appointment. In the months following, Banks, who also chairs the Republican Study Committee, has been one of the most vocal critics of the January 6th panel. And Representative Jim Banks joins me now. Representative Banks, first, how do you see the hearing last night and the work that the committee is doing?
Well, sadly, last night was no different than what we've seen before. It was a political exercise, truly a political witch hunt that was focused more on the Democrats' obsession with Donald Trump than anything at all about Capitol security or investigating the events that led up to January 6th so we can prevent something like that from ever happening again. I was very disappointed that there weren't specific questions and issues raised last night, as there has been throughout all of the activities of this committee, that addresses the concerns of rank-and-file Capitol Police officers who tell me that they weren't prepared for what happened on January 6th because of a breakdown of how intelligence was gathered and disseminated. They weren't equipped for it because they had outdated, faulty, and expired equipment. and they weren't trained for a riot at the Capitol. So all of those questions deserve answers, and those are the types of questions that if I were the ranking member on the committee and was in the room last night, that's what we would have been focused on.
I know that you are leading a separate investigation, and we look forward to your report, what you want to look at about January 6th and those security concerns. But I want to also give you a chance to answer really the main thrust of what the January 6th committee is saying here. They are charging that President Trump was central to what they call a multi-step conspiracy to overturn the election results and indeed in causing January 6th itself. I ask you, does President Trump bear any responsibility?
Well, last night what you saw was a series of selectively edited interviews. They recorded all of these interviews, but they didn't present the American people with any evidence that actually shows that Donald Trump directed the attack on the Capitol. They didn't present it because they don't have it. I mean, I can't get over the fact that in the president's speech that day at the White House, he told his supporters to go down to the Capitol and patriotically and peacefully make your voice heard. And there's never been any evidence brought forward that shows that he did anything other than that. He didn't direct the attack. He didn't tell people to attack the Capitol, to break into the Capitol, cause violence toward Capitol police officers. There's no evidence that he did that.
I do hear your words that former President Trump didn't direct an attack on the Capitol. He didn't say, please go break into the U.S. Capitol. I understand that. We're a place where we can have room for nuance, and we're careful with wording here. My question, though, is that does he bear any responsibility?
Again, I can't get past the lines in his speech when he told his supporters to go down to the Capitol and peacefully and patriotically make your voice heard. Now, Lisa, what I love about Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, is it's a place where you can go protest and make your voice heard, exercise your constitutional rights. And on that day, there were a lot of people who came to Washington, D.C., from my district, from all over the country, who came to support a president who they supported. They felt like the election wasn't conducted in a proper way. I have those same concerns about the constitutionality of how the election was conducted in states who changed election laws because of COVID leading up to Election Day, and people were upset about it, and they came to Washington to register that, and that's very American for people to do that. There were people, on the other hand, who broke into the Capitol, who were violent, who attacked Capitol police officers, and they should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The FBI has arrested hundreds of them, as they should, and they should be held to a very high standard in the court of law.
I know that you are someone who served in Afghanistan. Honor is something that matters to you. Liz Cheney said last night to those defending President Trump, there will be a day when President Trump is gone, but your dishonor will remain. She believes this is a real danger to the country. How do you reflect on the longer term implications, and how do you know that you are keeping your oath to your country higher than your duty to your party and one president?
Well, I take that question very seriously, and let me tell you, Liz Cheney will not be the arbiter of whether or not I keep my oath to my country. First and foremost, let me make that very clear. And never forget that this select committee has already been caught altering evidence. They've had to apologize for it. They doctored and altered text messages from Jim Jordan and others, and they were caught red-handed. And last night was it was very theatrical, the way that the committee hearing was conducted last night, selectively edited pieces and parts of interviews. That, to me, that's dishonorable. It's dishonorable that this isn't a bipartisan effort to give the American people the facts and the findings. There have been over 100,000 pages of evidence gathered by this committee, but they've only selectively offered the American people a very small part of it. There are serious questions about how this committee has been conducted, and to me, that ultimately is very dishonorable.
And one last thing. Do you agree there was no significant fraud in the 2020 election?
I base my vote to object on how states conducted their election without the approval of their state legislatures, and that's a serious constitutional question that I believe deserved greater scrutiny and debate. I've never once talked about a, quote, stolen election, Lisa. It wasn't about that to me. It was about the way that states, because of that, using COVID as an excuse, went to all mail-in ballots, changed their election laws, and how ballots were collected on Election Day without the approval of their state legislature.
I hear you saying, in other words, you're not saying that the election was stolen. You're saying there were process concerns you have. Congressman Jim Banks of Indiana, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
For more takeaways from last night's hearing, we turn to a member of the January 6th Select Committee, who also served as the lead impeachment manager in former President Trump's second impeachment trial. He is Maryland Democratic Representative Jamie Raskin. Congressman Raskin, thank you very much for joining us. What do you think the committee accomplished with last night's hearing?
Well, we showed not only that the whole plot against the 2020 presidential election was based on a big lie, but that Donald Trump knew it was a big lie, that all of his closest legal advisors, including Attorney General William Barr, the White House counsel, all of them told him that this was nonsense. There was nothing there. And yet he proceeded anyway, and he engaged in a 7-part plan to try to strip Joe Biden of his lawful majority in the Electoral College vote. He tried to usurp the will of the American people and replace the will of a sitting president who wanted to seize the presidency and essentially become an autocrat, a tyrant over the people. And we are also showing, and you saw a good piece of this last night, the way in which mob violence was recruited to the cause, and there were domestic violent extremist groups that came together to overthrow the election and to engage in insurrectionary violence against the constitutional order.
And Congressman, given that, what do you say to Republicans who are out there, like Congressman Jim Banks, who spoke today with my colleague Lisa Desjardins, who are saying that the committee used selectively edited videos, that it was mainly theatrical, and that you really didn't prove anything with regard to President Trump directing what happened at the Capitol?
Well, they've obviously been over our hearing with a fine-tooth comb. In other words, they come back and they cannot challenge a single fact. They cannot challenge a single piece of evidence, but they have to call the whole thing a sham, which is meaningless. They've tried that in court too, and all of the courts that have looked at it have rejected their claims that somehow we're unlawfully composed. No, they say we are a perfectly lawfully composed bipartisan entity, unlike our critics who are all of one particular political party. And we are engaged in the essential legislative work of trying to investigate an assault on the constitutional order itself. And the first rule of thumb for a democratic government is survival and self-preservation against those who would tear it down. And it's sad because, as we've been able to show already, a lot of them were very upset about what had happened. They were begging the president to act. They were very tough on the president for the first few days later. Then essentially Donald Trump brought them all back into line. It's a sad thing to say.
Congressman, one other point the Republicans continue to make is that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and others in the Democratic leadership prevented, in effect, the National Guard from being there to bolster what security the Capitol Police were able to provide. What's the response to that?
Well, that's utterly false and baseless. There's nothing to support that. And we will explain best we can how the National Guard's response was so slow, but it's the President of the United States who oversees the Army, which oversees the National Guard of the District of Columbia, which has no governor for itself. So that's a bizarre argument for them to make. But they're throwing up a lot of ridiculous stuff because they don't want to focus on the essence of this investigation, which is that we have a disappointed president who was defeated by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College, who refused to accept his defeat and decided to disseminate propaganda about this big lie and then work in a whole bunch of different ways to try to illegitimately undermine and destroy his opponent's victory in the presidential election. And that is not going to work for us as a constitutional democracy in this century.
And Congressman, given how divided the country is politically, how do you expect to change the minds of the millions of Americans who today believe former President Trump that the election was stolen?
Well, it's divided because of this. It's divided because there has been a big lie. It's divided because there's been this onslaught against fair elections across the country, administered by Republicans, Democrats, Independents. I think it's a responsibility that's not just on the shoulders of the 9 of us on this committee or everybody in Congress. It's a responsibility of everybody, and parents to talk to their kids and teachers to talk to their students and to explain how constitutional democracy works, and that there's a difference between fact and fiction. There's a difference between truth and lies and conspiracy theories. And the struggle to defend democratic institutions is interwoven with the struggle to arrive at the truth and to tell the truth to the people.
Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland, a member of the House January 6th Select Committee. Thank you so much.
It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Was classified, but when members of Congress pressed them for answers on what they really believe the F-18s off the coast of the United States really saw, well, we got nothing from the Pentagon. Here's Tennessee Congressman Tim Burchett after a dud UFO hearing last month.
The American public wants to know, and this kind of stuff right here does not do anything for their confidence in what's going on, because that we just got hosed, basically.
For whatever the reason, Pentagon officials seem to be terrified of aliens. If they exist, maybe the Pentagon knows they exist and just isn't telling us. Maybe we should be terrified. NASA scientists, on the other hand, well, they love the idea of life beyond galaxy. As we've reported, NASA sent nude images of humans to entice aliens to come, along with a map of Earth and how to get here in the galaxy. They sent a strain of DNA and a drawing of a hydrogen atom into space, all hoping to lure the aliens to us. It got us thinking. They, NASA, must really think that all aliens, maybe they know for some reason, are like E.T. It's a warming thought. But if that's how NASA views aliens, think about how the Pentagon must visualize them. Or maybe the truth lies somewhere in between. Nick Pope ran the British government's UFO project and joins us now on these matters, as he usually does. Nick, is there any reason to think NASA is going to be better at this than the Pentagon?
Well, I'm not sure, and they're tying their own hands, because listening to the conference yesterday, they made it pretty clear that they were going to be open and transparent, which is always a good thing, but that the study was basically going to be at an unclassified level. So you've got this bizarre situation that, as you've alluded to, the Pentagon has a lot of classified information on this, but NASA, it seems, won't be looking at that.
If NASA wanted to do it in a classified way, could they? Or is this sort of NASA just trying to get the pork barrel buffet of money, of government money, our money, to say they're doing something and then go buy new telescopes or something?
Well, there's not too much money in this. The study is going to cost a few tens of thousands and no more than $100,000, according to what they said yesterday. But I think, you know, we still have to see what we get. I mean, this is good news. I welcome it, but I have reservations. And as I say, the fact that you know, you've got information exchange issues, left hand, right hand. We've seen this with all sorts of problems with, for example, CIA and FBI having information and not sharing. Well, now we might end up in the same situation with NASA and the DOD.
NASA, though, seems to...
Humidity's been pretty low, but if you're wondering when those, you know, summer-like temperatures are going to be returning, well, it's going to be returning for a lot of us this weekend, and that continues into most of next week as well. So buckle up for some warm temperatures, and let's take a look at right now on First Alert Live Doppler, because things are pretty quiet. Got a couple isolated showers and storms across portions of southern Minnesota and also north and east of Aberdeen, mostly into the southeastern parts of North Dakota. Temperatures mostly in the middle and upper 70s to near 80 degrees. You can see Sisseton at 81 and Yankton at 73. And the winds overall about 5 to 15 miles per hour, mostly light and a little bit on the variable side. And here's those future temperatures the rest of the night. Sioux Falls, we drop down into the mid-60s by tomorrow morning, so not going to drop much more from where we're at, staying above average for this time of the year overnight.
Ron Lane joins me now. So, Ron, why did you ever want to get into some job like this in the first place?
Well, many years ago when I was young, my mom was a victim of a robbery, and she was robbed and beaten for just $7 that she had on her at the time, and they never caught them. They got away, and so that kind of stayed with me. And years later, when I joined the police department, I just had something inside of me that said I gotta try to do something about that. And so I talked a partner of mine into going along with it. He was young and crazy like I was, and I decided to hang out in areas where people got mugged, and I just put myself in the same position they were in, and then sooner or later I started getting mugged.
So to the audience, tell them what people can do. I mean, it seems like a real science the way these guys come up to you, they test you, they touch you, they feel you out first. What's the deal?
Well, the thing is, most robbers, all of them, actually are cowards. So they're just waiting for you to make a mistake. They have to be in control. So, you know, if you're in the area you're not familiar with, or, you know, you're on vacation somewhere, you should be with 2 or 3 people, especially today, the way it is all over the country. You know, you just don't be alone, because that's what they're waiting for, you to make a mistake so they're in control. Then you got a problem.
Do you want to fight back, or do you want to just give them everything you got and have it cool down?
Well, you want to fight back, but there's times where, you know, if you're by yourself and there's a couple of guys, they got weapons, whatever it is, you know, you want to survive first, you know what I mean? And you're not going to have a backup like I did.
Right. What have you learned about human nature doing this job and getting mugged more than 100 times?
Well, I don't trust people anymore. You know, I stopped trusting people for a long time, but I think because of that. You know, I never initiated conversations when I was on the street. I just walked around and like a normal person, and then robbers would pick up on me and follow me and then start kicking my butt. But you can't trust anybody anymore on the street, so.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing some of these tips with the audience. In this country at this point in 2022, we're all going to need it. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thanks for your service. You know his books.
Chief Pete Arredondo. He could be heard saying, people are going to ask why we're taking so long. We're trying to preserve the rest of the life. Texas safety officials have claimed that Arredondo, as the incident commander on the scene, was the one who made the call to stand down, causing officers to move from an active shooter protocol to a barricaded gunman protocol as the shooter continued to fire. Speaking to the Texas Tribune in his first interview since the deadly shooting, Arredondo denied ever making that call and indicated that he did not consider himself to be the incident commander, even though he was the first officer on the scene, which, according to his training, would put him in that role. He did defend his delayed response in confronting the shooter by saying that with no way to get through that locked classroom door, his strategy was to save as many children as possible by evacuating students from the other classrooms first. Joining me now is Donnell Harvin, senior policy researcher for the RAND Corporation and a first responder to the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting and the 9/11 attacks. It's always good to see you, Donnell. Let's go through this. The New York Times story was harrowing. The interview was interesting. But one of the pieces that came out in the interview, in both of those two pieces, is that Arredondo gets there first, and he leaves his radio behind because he says it was too clunky to carry it into the school. And therefore, he didn't have access to what was being said on 911. He also said that he didn't have a master key to the school, which you would think that since their only jurisdiction is that school district, that they would have keys to all the schools in that district. But he says he didn't have one. What do you make of that, of all of that?
You know, Joy, like I said last week, this is a buffet, a hot buffet of missed opportunities and mistakes. The first thing is that you are no use to anybody in a command and control situation if you don't have a radio. That's rule number one. The second thing is you mentioned earlier in your lead-in that the incident command structure is something that we have that all first responders abide by. It's called the ICS system, or NIMS, National Incident Management System. And that dictates that the first arriving first responder is the incident commander, the person who's in charge. And as the more senior people arrive, those individuals assume a charge. Well, he is the chief. And so if you don't have a radio and you're not in control, then who is?
Can you understand in any way what he says a lot in these interviews is that he's trying to preserve as many lives as possible and that was his priority. Evacuating the kids from the other rooms was important, which is important, getting those kids out. We even learned that the cousin of the shooter was across the hall in another classroom, that they're trying to evacuate other people. But he seemed to be very clear that he didn't want to put other officers' lives at risk by going through that door, even if they'd been able to open the door. Is that the way it's supposed to work?
Well, not only is that a breach of protocol, but it's also a breach of training. And I've reached out to a lot of active shooter trainers over the last couple of weeks that I know, and I look back at the training I got. The training is very, very clear. It's an active shooter. It doesn't transition into a barricade. They try to make it sound like this is some unique situation. Once the shots are fired and people are down, you continuously go and try to breach into that room and take down that armed assailant. And so the fact of the matter is, and even in the Texas training, we looked this up, the Texas training specifically said, if you're fear for your own life and you're worried about getting shot, then you need another job. And quite frankly, it's acknowledged that when you put that badge and you put that uniform on and you respond to an active shooter, you may give up your life so that someone else may be saved. And so that decision, I think, is going to be well analyzed for many years. But it certainly, I don't think, in my opinion, was the right decision.
We know that in Sandy Hook, you know, there was also a lot of death. A lot of children died. And we know the shooter actually killed themselves. But the response times seemed very different. That it seemed that police did get there quicker to Sandy Hook. And again, also, obviously, the shooter killed himself. What are the differences, in your view, between the way that those two incidences played out?
Well, most active shooter incidents play out over less than 2 to 3 minutes. And so by the time law enforcement gets there, the shooting is over. Either they give up or they take their own life. This is unique because this armed assailant was an active assailant for over an hour. Yeah. You don't know if he's reloading, if his gun is jammed. You don't know anything. So long as he's an active assailant, you don't negotiate with someone like that. You try to take them down. So these are two different scenarios. Yeah. Once again, most active shooter scenarios unfold over a very short period of time. Yeah. This unfolded way too long.
Yeah, it obviously and clearly did. Donnell Harvin, thank you. Always appreciate you. And don't go anywhere, everyone, because Who in the Week is still coming. It is still Friday. We're still going to do that. But first, what to make of the PGA Tour suspending golf stars who signed up for a rival Saudi-backed tour that Trump himself is cashing in on? That in a second.
Cannot travel to certain countries which are on friendly terms with Vladimir Putin. That is absolutely clear. Also, I understand that my family back in Moscow is a potential target, and we already see some moves in this direction. And obviously, the idea of the FSB, because it is the FSB which is behind this investigation, is to stop me from reporting. That I understand, but because I've been doing this for 22 years, and the very first time I was investigated by the FSB, it was exactly 20 years ago, so I understand what is going on.
Andre, you know, the reason that they're targeting you and going after you right now is because of your reporting. You've done some incredible reporting on the FSB, on what's been going on in this war specifically, right? On Putin, on his strategy, on what's going on in his inner circle, on the FSB members and whether they had been detained, house arrest, all of this. And now I know you have learning more about tactics, new tactics that the FSB is using. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, what we see now is that the Kremlin and the FSB is moving against people who already left the country. I'm not the only journalist targeted now by the Russian authorities, and all of us are now abroad. So the obvious objective of the Russian authorities is to find a way how to get us back or to silence us. And we already know that at least several families of people who left were visited by the FSB and kindly asked to contact with people who left and ask them to get back.
Wow. All right. Well, Andre, I appreciate your taking the time to talk to us. We'll talk to you again soon. And again, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Money Talks, another top U.S. golfer leaving the PGA Tour to join the controversial Saudi-funded league, where some golfers have been reportedly offered 9 figures to work less. And Texas authorities still reeling from their response to Uvalde, now facing questions about why some people weren't notified that a convicted murderer was on the loose.
Plans or affect their safety, including grain terminals like this one. And as the invasion continues to wreak havoc, President Putin just compared himself to Russia's first emperor, Peter the Great, drawing parallels between his modern-day territorial ambitions and the 18th century Tsar's founding of St. Petersburg on land seized from Sweden.
When Peter the Great founded the new capital, St. Petersburg, no European country recognized it as Russia. We will prevail in solving the issues we are facing.
Putin's so-called solution has caused a catastrophe that has left 20 million Ukrainians displaced and stranded, like Alexandra and Natalia, who don't know if they will ever return home.
We cannot answer this question because we don't know if there's still a home to go back to, and if our home is still standing.
Not anymore. They told us that moments after we spoke with them, their home was bombed. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm William Brangham.
And we'll be back shortly, but first, take a moment to hear from your local PBS station. It's a chance to offer your support, which helps keep...
At least the Democrats hope that. The Republicans, on the other hand, say, this is old news. We didn't learn anything new, but we really did. We learned facts, and we had real live witnesses and depositions under oath who told Trump that he wasn't going to win and why he wasn't going to win. And we also had insiders who said, you got to do something to stop this, and Trump did nothing about it.
Yeah,
in real terms, in real time.
Right, no, all things that we knew, and as you point out, sort of we filled in, or we will fill in, the behind the scenes, if you will, over the next couple of weeks. From a defense lawyer's perspective, and I'm interested in this, because you always under-promise the jury, right, and then you over-deliver. But this committee...
Ideally.
Ideally. But I feel like you know where I'm going with this, because last night we had been promised by Democrats for weeks that this was going to be a blockbuster. It was going to change everything. It was going to totally change the narrative, and that just didn't happen.
Well, I think Barr's testimony and Ivanka Trump's testimony had the power to change the narrative. There's several other hearings. The new video from the videographer or the film person, the documentary person, that was new. But again, you're not going to give them everything on the opening. The trial takes 2, 3, 4 weeks here, and they've still got time to deliver on new facts, new witnesses, and really getting behind the conspiracy behind this. I think all Americans ought to be interested, and all Americans would be concerned about how close we were to avoiding or doing away with the peaceful transfer of power. All of us ought to be interested in that, whether you're in the media, the law, or you're just a voter.
What do you make, and I found this fascinating as well, the people who came and watched stayed, 20 million. largely throughout the whole 2 hours, which Lord knows any television producer would love to get an audience that stays through the whole time. But the flip side of that is that Fox News, which aired essentially counter-programming and tried to discredit and debunk the committee for 2.5 hours, they had the exact same viewership they had a year ago this week. Doesn't that just say that there really isn't any undecided or changeable minds out there?
Well, Leland, you can do a lot with the numbers. What you draw from the numbers, that's a fair analysis, if you will, but I don't think it's fair in the totality of the circumstances. We won't know about Fox viewership because they didn't run it, for example. You can talk about the other networks. We know how many people tuned into that. And be honest with you, 3 to 5 or 3 to 6 million people, that's a lot of viewers who stood there and stayed there and wanted to know the details of this so that America could avoid it again. It's midterms, and so you're gonna have people who have decided already. But there are a lot of independents and others who are anti-Trumpers who really want to know the bottom line, I think. That's what the numbers show.
You make a great point about the anti-Trump part of the Republican Party. I wish we had more time to get to it. Hey, Scott, it was good to see you. Thank you. Welcome back anytime. We enjoyed the conversation.
Hey, thank you for having me, Leland.
Thank you. How Apple Computer and Steve Jobs changed the world and why so many missed out on the investment opportunity of a lifetime.
Get the recommended servings of fruits and vegetables every day with.
Wait for it. Trump-owned golf courses. With me now, Bomani Jones, host of The Right Time with Bomani Jones podcast and Game Theory on HBO. Well, Bomani, you know, all bags ain't good bags, but apparently this is such a big bag that they just don't care. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, there are a couple of levels of this. One is that a lot of the professionals on the PGA Tour legitimately feel like the tour has too much control. Like NFTs have become a battleground for these guys where this tour will not allow them the rights to their own images, which is the kind of thing that would understandably make somebody upset. Now, does it make you decide to go do business with the Saudis? Well, that's a different question. And basically what Greg Norman said when he was asked about the human rights things with Saudi Arabia and everything else, it was basically, every country has dirt. That's not an exact quote, but that's basically what he said, which is kind of like saying, well, there is no ethical capitalism, really, right? Like his thing is the people that got the checks, we are doing this, they are supplying the money, and people like Phil Mickelson want to spite the tour so badly that they're willing to go ahead and do this. Meanwhile, the PGA Tour, I think, is ultimately fighting for survival on this just because of what the quantity of money is that the Saudis are willing to throw out there. So some guys have decided it wasn't worth it for them. They're going to stay with the tour. But I'm not going to pretend like I don't understand why somebody would take $200 million to go play golf with them.
But here's the thing. I mean, I'm old enough to remember I ain't going to play Sun City. A lot of musical artists gave up a lot of money where they could have made a lot of money touring. Touring is where most musical artists make their money. Let's just be clear. And they gave up the chance to play Sun City, South Africa because of the ethics of it. In this case, Jamal Khashoggi was killed. The CIA says the Saudi crown prince did it. But you know, Jared Kushner's willing to take his money. Obviously, Donald Trump, because, you know, he has no ethics. He's going to go ahead and take his money. But is there no line where players say, you know what, that's too much?
Oh, I think there are lines for some people. Like, yeah, a whole lot of people said they wasn't going to play Sun City. A few others were like, I hear there's some dates open at Sun City that you guys might need to fill in. Like, so if we take this to a different era, like after Patrice Lumumba is killed in the Congo, where people being like, hey, well, we're not going to do any business with the Belgians. Like, folks are admittedly selective about when it is that they choose to draw the lines on these things. The thing is, especially for people in this country, Saudi Arabia just jumps off the page so strongly, and the Khashoggi situation is so present in our minds. But people all the time ignore reprehensibility in the name of making money. What's interesting to me about this is Phil Mickelson is the only person so far to explicitly say, yeah, they do lots of terrible things over there, but I want to stick it to the PGA. Everybody else has gotten off on this because they're just not talking about it. And it reminds me of the national anthem situation in the NFL, where Colin Kaepernick clearly articulated why he wasn't standing for the national anthem. Lots of other guys didn't stand and then never said anything for it, and they get commercials, right?
Right.
Mickelson was just the one person dumb enough to say the quiet part out loud.
But speaking of the NFL, let's talk about Jack Del Rio. Jack Del Rio, who's the defensive coordinator for the Commanders, Washington Commanders, he's getting fined $100 grand now because he called the insurrection against our capital, quote unquote, a dust up. Harry Dunn last night, we had him on MSNBC as part of our coverage of the January 6th hearings. He went at him. What do you make of the fact that he's getting fined? Is that enough?
Well, I am reluctant to say that he should have been fired for that, just because I feel like I'm saying you should fire him because I didn't like what he said. And that makes me uncomfortable, because when it goes in the other direction, I would vehemently oppose it. What I think is kind of interesting about this, though, is I don't think Del Rio realizes what a loser of a position this is, especially in D.C. So you can talk about this in lots of other places, and it's just kind of a hypothetical thing. But when you talk about it in a city where people know people who were there that day, they know people that were part of that police force, they don't really have a sense of humor about what it is that he's talking about and he decided to come out and say, right? That's where I think that he ultimately got it wrong. Is I think a lot of the people who believe in the idea that the election was stolen, you got to look around and realize people who are running for election on that platform, they're not winning. Like, this isn't something where you got a real army that's behind you. You might have an army big enough to storm the Capitol, but you don't have an army big enough to protect you on this one. Overall, some of the most inflammatory people we know of, when this happened in January of 2021, they stood down. They were like, hey, this is a little farther than we could go. Jack Del Rio was the last person to get the memo.
Yeah, absolutely. And when people that defended the Capitol are saying you're wrong, you're on the wrong end of that argument. Bomani's going to stick with us, though, because we're going to have Bomani play Who Won the Week, and that's right after this break.
That one is Rourke.
Well, I'm going to guess.
You're guessing? Both guessing Sheila Jackson Lee. Let's see the answer.
And we all agree that we want the border to be better. In fact, I think the border's pretty great right now.
Oh, you're an idiot.
He's a joke.
All right. The border's great, according to Beto. You guys are not off to a great start, though. Still 0-0, but tied, so we're keeping it interesting. Next category, high as hell.
My sister's
News Daily.
My turn to take.
And with the ongoing support of these institutions.
To me, that life is all about instincts. You know when you know. They certainly knew back in 1972. I'll see you Monday.
Dead Man Talking. Known by many aliases, he's the American hiding in Scotland to avoid a rape charge, and he can't seem to stay quiet. We hear from his uncle, his attorney, and the prosecutor who wants him back in the U.S. to face charges. Tonight on Dan Abrams Live.
Motrin works fast to stop pain where it starts, like those nagging headaches, uncomfortable period pain.
Age. When you buy a Beautyrest X-Class or IntelliBed mattress from Mattress Firm, we donate a brand new mattress to Furniture Mission.
And the answer is?
My plans are to produce the strongest, fastest, most widespread economic recovery America has ever experienced. With record jobs, new record small businesses, and wages rising.
All right, very, very lively by Joe Biden, but this is getting a little more lively. You guys are tied.
We agree on everything.
All right, let's see about that. Next category is Oh Joy.
With cleft conditions live in darkness and shame. They're shunned, outcast, living in pain. You can reach out and change the life of a suffering child right now. A surgery that takes as little as 45 minutes. And your act of love can change a child's life forever. Please call or visit operationsmile.org now. Thousands of children are waiting.
Hi, Phil Swift here. People.
I knew that anything was possible.
University, as historians and authors from across the nation discuss the past, present, and future of democracy with an array of topics like energy politics, presidential scandals, the history of redlining, and public housing. And at 5 p.m. Eastern, Bob Bostock, a former speechwriter for Christine Todd Whitman, EPA administrator for George W. Bush, talks about the EPA's origins and the environmental politics and policies of the 1970s. Exploring the American story. Watch American History TV, Saturday on C-SPAN 2. And find a full schedule on your program guide or watch online anytime at cspan.org/history. Sunday on Q&A, A look at recent advancements in space exploration with astrophysicist Jan Levin on the image of the Sagittarius A star.
With the size of the court, and does
saw the inmate.
Oh my God.
What the heck?
A family driving by captured the aftermath.
He's in the woods.
When the inmate bus crashed here, Lopez took off running into this wooded area outside of Centerville, Texas. State and local law enforcement agencies spent 3 weeks searching this area for him. And then Mark Collins and his 4 grandchildren were found murdered in their home less than a mile from this very spot. The Collins family arrived at their Serene Ranch last Thursday. They lived in the Houston area. Collins, a 66-year-old grandfather, and his grandchildren, ages 11 to 18, planned to spend the weekend fishing and hanging out on the property. At some point in the 2 days before, Texas prison officials say Lopez entered a house on the property next to the Collins family ranch. An alert was never sent out to residents in the area, and Collins' family friends wonder if a warning might have saved their lives.
I do feel that had Mark been made aware that he was within a day or two of being on his property, he would have never exposed those kids to that danger.
Texas prison officials say DNA confirmation that Lopez was inside that other home came about the same time investigators were making the horrific discovery that the Collins family had been killed. A Texas prison official says the alert wasn't shared because DNA testing at the scene had not been confirmed. Prison officials say they never had reason to believe that Lopez had ever managed to escape that area. Andy Kahn is the victim services advocate for Houston Crime Stoppers and has met with the Collins family. He says Lopez was a convicted murderer, serving a life sentence, a member of a Mexican drug cartel, and should never have been allowed on the bus.
This was well thought out, methodical, and planned in a cartel-like fashion. This was almost like watching an El Chapo escape scenario in real life that resulted in the massacre of 5 people.
Ed Lavendera, CNN, Centerville, Texas.
Thanks so much for joining us. AC 360 starts now.
After making headlines and getting eyeballs, the question now, after a powerful primetime opening night, comes down to this. What's next? What will come of the House January 6th hearings? John Berman here in for Anderson. The answer to that will depend on the answers to a string of other questions. Can the committee in the coming weeks make the ambitious case it laid out last night? What will the Justice Department, which has already brought hundreds of charges in connection with the Capitol assault, do with information the Select Committee has uncovered? And will these hearings generate the kind of political consensus that might be needed before the Attorney General decides to aim as high as the Select Committee is already suggesting might be necessary?
President Trump summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. You will also hear about plots to commit seditious conspiracy on January 6th, a crime defined in our laws as conspiring to overthrow, put down, or destroy by force the government of the United States, or to oppose by force the authority thereof.
When Committee Vice Chair Liz
Times, among other publications, disappeared along with his colleague Bruno Piera. The two were last seen Sunday in a remote region of the Amazon rainforest in far western Brazil. Now, a criminal investigation has been opened into this case, but critics say the Brazilian government has been absent from the search.
The lowest level ever recorded. Why? Really, it comes down to energy. The cost of energy is up nearly 40% over last year. The average price of a gallon of gas is now over $5, but it won't stop there. JP Morgan predicts it'll get to $6, and soon. So when the price of fuel goes up, so does the price of everything else, because our transportation systems are dependent on the price of fuel. And when it gets high enough, people can't go anywhere. Even the police in Michigan.
With panel points finger at Trump. Even in Red Alaska, the Anchorage Daily News implicitly blamed the ex-president with an arresting headline, again, quote, an attempted coup. We have known the contours of Donald Trump's coup attempt for some time. And while many assumed we would get powerful new images from the insurrection itself, like the ones you are seeing on your screen right now. There was a sense of trepidation, I think partly born of what happened with the Mueller report, that after a year of leaks and countless tell-all books about the final days of the Trump administration, there might be just nothing left for the committee to reveal. Needless to say, that was not the case. In fact, people across the country tuned in huge, surprisingly huge numbers. At least 20 million people watched the 2-hour hearing last night. That's the Nielsen numbers. For context, that's on par with events like Sunday night football games or the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. That's big America watches kind of stuff. And the hearing also delivered in terms of what it broadcast. I mean, we on this show have been covering the insurrection, its aftermath, about as closely as anyone in the media. And there were still multiple brand new revelations last night that took us here on All In, our staff, by surprise. We were slacking the whole time. Is that new? Did we know that? Have we seen that before? There was the news that a Trump campaign lawyer named Alex Cannon told Chief of Staff Mark Meadows back in November, that Trump's claims of election fraud were bogus.
I remember a call with Mr. Meadows, where Mr. Meadows was asking me what I was finding and if I was finding anything. And I remember sharing with him that we weren't finding anything that would be sufficient to change the results in any of the key states.
When was that conversation?
Probably in November. Mid to late November. I think it was before my child was born.
And what was Mr. Meadows' reaction to that information?
I believe the words he used were, so there's no there there.
There's no there in mid to late November from Mark Meadows. That is new.
Food shortages. Well, of course, that was 2008. This is not news. Anyone who's been paying attention can tell you. Ethanol is bad for the environment. It's terrible for engines. And it is, above all, a disaster for your food supply. So at the same moment we are facing food shortages, the Biden administration has decided to make food scarcer and more expensive.
Saying that the two had gone in an ill-advised adventure into the forest. What do you make of that statement?
I think it's very poor use of words. This is not an isolated situation. There are similar incidents. I think there was another member of a similar group that was murdered a few years previously in retaliation to actions against illegal mining in the same area. So it is a situation where we see all too often threats that have sort of been followed through and that ended in a disaster.
As I mentioned, you prepared.
Others are doing, especially when there's a close relationship.
And it certainly was a close relationship, still is a close relationship. The day of January 6th, there were very few people, John, who wanted to go into the Oval Office and speak with Trump that day. It was something that we had heard in real time as it was going on. A lot of people were avoiding the Oval Office, but the people who were going in, including Ivanka, were trying to get former President Trump to call off his supporters, to tell them to go home, to leave the Capitol. She was someone who had gone into the Oval Office many times. Keith Kellogg, who was Pence's national security advisor, testified to the committee about how tenacious she was going in there and talking to her father. So the idea that she wasn't involved or she wasn't really closely related to what was going on that day and the response that was coming out of the White House is obviously just divorced from reality. And I should note, she went and testified for about 8 hours to this committee. And Trump told the Washington Post he basically gave Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner his blessing to go in there. They did not have to do so under subpoena. They did not want to end up in a situation that Steve Bannon or Peter Navarro has ended up in. And so they went in there willingly and testified, and it was for hours. And I think that's what's a really notable aspect of seeing Trump come out and dismiss her and try to put some distance between her. Is surprising, but not really that shocking, given, of course, it's something he's done before. It does speak to the levels that he'll go to try to explain away what was happening on that day, John.
And again, as you say, Caitlin, it begs the question, what else did she say? And also maybe for future discussion, what's the nature of her current relationship with her father? Caitlin Collins, thank you so much for being with us. More now on the larger what's next questions. For that, we're joined by CNN legal analyst Norm Eisen. He served as special counsel in the first Trump impeachment, as White House ethics czar in the Obama administration, before that as ambassador to the Czech Republic. Also CNN contributor and former Watergate hearing star witness John Dean. John, I want to start with you. Obviously, these hearings are not a court of law, but if you are Attorney General Merrick Garland tonight and you're processing what you've seen and what you expect to see next week, what's going through your mind?
You're watching these hearings very closely. To use the Watergate analogy, Archibald Cox, by this time, had taken place or become a special prosecutor when the hearings started, and he tried to stop the hearings. He didn't want them televised for fear they would result in corrupting the trials or not being able to get a good jury. So attorneys general and prosecutors watch these very closely for what they can have implications on any investigation or later trial or indictment that they might bring. So they're paying very close attention.
So, Norm, according to CNN's reporting, Justice Department officials were watching for what kind of possible crimes the committee believes it has uncovered. What evidence does Attorney General Garland need for possible prosecutions, in your opinion? And what does it seem that the committee has and doesn't have so far?
John, thanks for having me back, and always wonderful to be on with the other John. I think we need to ask the question a little differently, because it's not just Attorney General Garland, John. It's also the Fulton County, Georgia, the Atlanta DA, Fani Willis, who's moving even more quickly with her special grand jury to possible criminal charges. So what do these two sets of prosecutors need? They need sufficient proof to bring a case. We already have a federal judge who says Trump likely committed 2 federal crimes, John. Obstruction of Congress, that's 18 U.S.C. 1512, by trying to blow up the hearings, the recognition of his certification of his electors on January 6th, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. And that's where we get into the 7-part plan that was laid out yesterday. I think there was already substantial evidence. That's why a federal judge said it's likely Trump committed these crimes. And we heard more last night. The most important, number 1 was Bill Barr. Number 2 was Ivanka Trump. They showed Trump knew he had lost this election, so all of his activity was corrupt. And finally, for the Georgia prosecutor, we got reports, perhaps, Brad Raffensperger, the Georgia Secretary of State, he of the infamous Trump telling him in a tape-recorded call, John, just find 11,780 votes. So the evidence is accumulating.
So, John, is there any risk of the DOJ, should it pursue a criminal case against high-level people involved in the insurrection, leaning too heavily on the roadmap put forth by the committee? Could a defense lawyer argue that politics and criminal cases are not supposed to overlap?
They won't rely exclusively on what the Congress is doing. They'll have their own grand jury. They'll collect their own evidence. I think they are collecting their own evidence right at this time. They have witnesses that the committee may or may not know of. Justice does not need the Hill to help them.
So, Norm, in terms of what's to come, Jake Tapper asked Chairman Benny Thompson if there are going to be witnesses that describe actual conversations between extremist groups and anyone in Trump's orbit. The answer was yes, there will be. Legally speaking, how damning could that evidence be?
Depending on how you define orbit, John, it could be very damning. If Trump can be shown to have been a part of the planning of the violence, the more he's on notice of the violence, the more dangerous that evidence is to him. So we'll see.
All right, Norm Eisen, John Dean, thank you both so much for being with us. On a related note, the former president's attorney and a man once known as America's mayor is now facing the possibility of losing his license to practice law in the nation's capital. A new filing from the D.C. bar accuses Rudy Giuliani of violating Pennsylvania's rules of professional conduct. According to the filing, Giuliani pushed unsubstantiated election fraud accusations in a Pennsylvania federal court on behalf of the former president. CNN asked Giuliani's attorney for comment but got no response. Giuliani has already been suspended from practicing law by the New York bar. Next for us tonight, a look ahead to what we can expect to see in Monday's televised January 6th hearing. Abby Phillip and Carl Bernstein join us for that. And later, Uvalde, for the first time, the police chief who was supposed to be in charge is speaking out. For starters, he seems to be saying he actually wasn't in charge, that he actually didn't issue any orders. And it gets even harder to believe than that.
Bring your eyes into the
which at their residences is now 24/7. It comes amid recent threats, protests outside some justices' houses, and upcoming decisions on Roe versus Wade and other controversial cases.
So we know that heightened level of scrutiny towards the court is going to put them under more intense pressure.
Roth says the justices' family protection will likely cost in the millions. And just for a bit of perspective here, the State Department reportedly paying $2 million a month for the protection of former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and a former top aide. The federal judiciary for this upcoming budget year has requested $785 million for security needs. That would include the Supreme Court. Marnie?
Necessary safety steps. All right. Thank you, Evan. A major break tonight in a 40-year-old cold case. A little baby who vanished many, many years ago has now been found alive. She's a grown woman, and she just learned her real identity all these years later. The Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, will join us next to talk about the case. Also, 2 teachers arrested and some disturbing video. The mother who called 911 speaking out for the very first time about what she saw and then acted upon. Coming up here on News Nation Prime next.
My mental health was.
It's like this guy at a gas station the other day. Watch this.
The economic jolts is not felt equally. A new Bank of America report found household credit card spending for fuel surged to 7.8% by the end of May, but a whopping 9.5% for families making under $50,000.
They call it inflation, but somebody's pocket are getting inflated. We're the ones hurting down here, the poor people.
Okay. So inflation almost certainly is hurting you. In fact, a new analysis out today showed that the average family will pay this year a full month in its total income just in inflation. A full month. Who's it good for? Well, if you've got massive corporate debt, it's a really good deal because you get to pay yesterday's accounts, yesterday's debts with today's inflated dollars. That money has lower real value, so you are getting a deal. It's a scam. They're doing this on purpose. But you could only pull that off if the people you were hurting were completely distracted. So let's scream at them some more about January 6th. Then they might not notice.
Of one, I believe, and that's the Attorney General.
That point about corruptly leapt out at me too. In violation of the law, she said about plainly said about Donald Trump's actions many times. And the broader idea here of the kind of the plot, right, Ari? Which again, I think you're right that like the 20 million who saw it. Here's the way I feel. I think people's impressions of what happened on January 6th was that like things got out of control. And what yesterday seemed to lay out to me, which is something that you and I have both been reporting on, is this wasn't the plan going sideways. This was the plan.
Right, and a plan with a multi-pronged strategy. Sometimes when people ask for advice, they say, like, how should I plan my career? And I always say, like, a plan is shooting at one thing, and a strategy is multiple ways to do something, even if one door closes.
Right, yes. So it was a good planning exercise in that respect.
Now, they had a strategy with multiple doors.
Correct.
You talked about this last night in our coverage. Disappear Mike Pence one way or another. Right. That's one way to do the certification. Send it back to the states by obstructing the official proceeding, Cheney's legal language, right? Recruit enough lawmakers to say that some states were so formally contested that the election has not been quote unquote certified. That's the sweep, which is a football term for a coup.
Right.
all of these different strategies show you that there was more than one thing going on that was designed to get to the place where Donald Trump either stays in power past the 20th or the whole thing is much more contested, quote unquote, and goes back to the courts than it should have.
Do you think, I guess my question is, having worked in the federal prosecutor's office, I mean, again, this is, I mean, you can't think of a hotter, more, I don't know, polarizing, scary thing to be around if you're a federal prosecutor, like, we're going to indict the former president for a coup. But that is a lot of what centers around this. And I'm not just saying that, it's just so evident in Cheney's presentation, the committee's finding that they clearly think that's the case.
Absolutely. That was a clear takeaway from last night.
Very clear.
It's, you know, Chairman Thompson said it right off the bat. This was not a spontaneous riot. This was a multi-pronged, multifaceted, long time in the making conspiracy. And Liz Cheney